Today's webinar is a production of the Virginia Small Business Development Center, which serves the Lynchburg region. Through 29 centers across the Commonwealth, the SBDC provides training and technical assistance to small businesses. The Virginia SBDC is headquartered at George Mason University and is a program that is a cooperative agreement between the U.S. Small Business Administration, premier institutions across Virginia, and our local governments. My name is Stephanie Keener, and I am the Executive Director of the Virginia SBDC, which serves the city of Lynchburg, Amherst, Appomattox, Bedford, and Campbell counties. We're locally hosted at the Lynchburg Regional Business Alliance in downtown Lynchburg. Today's topic is the second in our two-part series on risk assessment and mitigation for small businesses. And I think if you were with us the last time, you know that we have two really great facilitators with us. I cannot wait to hear what Bill has for us today. And I hope that everyone got the packet of materials that we sent out yesterday. If you didn't get that, check your spam box, because I know you will be using those materials today in the workshop. So today's topic is mitigating risk for your small business, and our facilitator, Bill Bond, is the Chief Operating Officer for Sobus Inc., a small business located here in Lynchburg and in Fredericksburg, Virginia. For the last 18 years, he has supported communities and projects around the world with hazard and climate change risk assessments, including over 30 hazard mitigation plans in the U.S., conducting risk assessments for natural hazards and identifying potential mitigation actions. He's worked with organizations around the globe, including the World Bank and the International Finance Corporation. He supported the development of the Central Virginia Hazard Mitigation Plan and the Community Resilience Course for the National Disaster Preparedness Training Center, the Coastal Climate Adaptation Course for NOAA's Coastal Services Center, and was an author of the World Bank's Community Reconstruction Handbook. Jennifer Woofter, who's also with us today, is a sustainability consultant and small business coach. Over the last 2 decades, she has worked with hundreds of organizations, ranging from startups to Fortune 500 companies, to hone their business strategies, respond to changing market demands, and improve profitability. As a judge in Mentor Capital Network's annual Sustainable Business Competition, she was determined to be in the top 10% of more than 200 judges, based on the entrepreneur's rating of her feedback on issues like overall value, immediate use, and novel ideas. Jennifer is the president of Strategic Sustainability Consulting, and she also serves as an advisor with the SBDC Lynchburg region, and we are thrilled to have her in that role. Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you now. We have people continuing to pop into the room, so you will notice that throughout the period. And we have a couple polls today, so Bill, let me know when you're ready for me to put those up on the screen, and you guys be ready to answer our questions, okay? Turn it over to you.
Thank you. Let's see here. So today we're going to focus on mitigation. The last workshop, basically, we worked on our risk assessment. So hopefully you all have had a chance to kind of go through your risk assessment information. That hopefully you were able to find maybe your hazard mitigation plan locally. If you're in Virginia, again, you're looking at your planning district commission. So I hope that you all had success in finding your own mitigation plan. And you'll see, if you had a chance to look through it, there was a lot of detail. There's a lot of detail in those plans on the different hazards that you may experience in your communities. So somebody's already taken a lot of time to go through and evaluate the hazards for the community, and all that information is available to you that you you can look at that and you can use it for your own risk assessment for your own business. So that, you know, it's a great document, and hopefully you've had a chance to look at your own. Today, like I said, we're going to focus on basically mitigation. So now that we have this information on risk, we know kind of how bad can it get, where can those risks occur. We can start to actually go in and mitigate that risk. So we need to answer a couple of questions. Things like how bad can it get? And we had those worksheets last time that gave you kind of a starting point to start thinking about and actually start to quantify your risk. You know, the economic impacts, social impacts of those risks to your business. So we can use that, and we'll have some additional worksheets in this workshop where we'll take that information and we'll try to figure out what we might be able to do to reduce or eliminate those risks. So the agenda today, basically, I'll talk a little bit about the materials that Stephanie sent out yesterday, and I'll talk about some of the mitigation concepts. So for each of our hazards, we have kind of a corresponding mitigation, several different mitigation strategies we can select from, or mitigation project if we're thinking it's going to take some maybe a contractor to come in and fix up the business, or if it's just something like planning, you know, reaching out to our employees. All these things are types of mitigation actions that we'll talk about today. And then we'll go through kind of a little bit of your own risk review. So hopefully you had a chance to take a look at your own hazards and how you're at risk to them. And then I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking about mitigation. So types of mitigation for the different hazards. So I'll focus on those that are most relevant to Virginia. We'll take a little bit of a break at some point, probably halfway through. Then we'll start looking at some of the costs of that mitigation as well, and then how are we going to pay for it. So, you know, we'll look at our hazards to figure out kind of the magnitude of the issue, and that will help us figure out kind of what sort of mitigation solution is best for us. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. So some of those sources of funding, and then some additional resources as well. So there's a lot of resources, kits and tools and guidance that has already been developed, and we can just go to and see what others are doing. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So the materials are similar to the last time. We have our slides, which I'm going to go through today. But then we also have kind of a resource guide. This is a one-pager PDF document that I'm going to browse to as we go through the slides. But it'll give us some additional information on some of that guidance and tools that are available to us kind of outside this workshop. And then we've got a worksheet as well. So this will be a separate worksheet from the one we worked at in the last time. This one will be focused on mitigation. We'll be taking some of the outputs, though, of that first worksheet and putting them in as inputs to this mitigation worksheet. So hopefully you've got some numbers there that you can start to plug in. And if not, you can come back to this as well down the road. So one question is sort of, you know, what is mitigation? We talk about it quite often. And there are different types of mitigation, depending on whether we're talking about climate change or whether we're talking about hazard mitigation. So our focus today is basically on the hazard mitigation part. So it's an effort to reduce our loss of life or property from those disasters. Today I'm going to talk about natural hazards, but also some cyber and some pandemics as well that can be considered technological or human cause maybe as well. Every so often FEMA comes out with a guide on mitigation, and they try to figure out how much money you can save by spending on mitigation. So basically the money you put into mitigation down the road when you have a disaster, you're not putting in additional money to basically recover from that disaster. So they try to figure out, for every dollar, how much do you get back on a return on your investment. And for years it has been $4. So for every dollar, we get a $4 return. But now we're finding over the last decade or so that value has actually increased to $6 of future disaster losses for every dollar spent on mitigation. Okay, so it's actually, and maybe it's because we're seeing more disasters. Maybe there's more built environment on the coastline. So all these things kind of factor into that, into this mitigation value. So just think of it like that. If you spend the money now on mitigation, down the road when you actually have an event occur, you're gonna get that money back because you're not gonna have to spend it on recovering from your disaster. So we'll talk about basically the cost of some of this mitigation and what solution makes most sense for you all. Okay, so what is resilience? This is a term that gets used quite often as well, but I really see it as sort of a way not just to survive, but also to adapt and to actually come out of a situation better than what you went into it as. Basically, it's looking at communities, the people in those
Bill.
communities. Oh yeah, sorry.
Can I interrupt you for a sec?
Sure.
I'm not seeing your slides on the screen.
Not at all, none of them?
Nope.
Okay. Let's see here. All right.
There we go.
Okay. Sorry about that. I have to use a different computer right now because I'm actually in my own mitigation world right now. We had a computer issue with my laptop this morning, so I've had to mitigate and find a different computer. So I was just talking about resilience and this ability to kind of bounce back from a disaster. This is the Rockefeller Foundation definition of it, which I like. Again, we're trying to get into a better place than where we started. So a lot of that we can do kind of before this catastrophic event. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So a couple of quotes that I've got here. One is Thomas Carlyle, and this was, I think, very relevant today, although it was written back in the 1800s. But by nature, man hates change. Seldom will he quit his old home till it has actually fallen around his ears. I think we see that a lot today. We kind of, we don't want to spend a lot of time and effort to think about mitigation before the events. And a lot of times we can see things, we're like, well, that could probably happen to me. But really, you've got to kind of be proactive, and you've got to change things and before you're kind of in the middle of a disaster. The other one is Nelson Mandela. The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time we fall. So if we do have an event, like the pandemic now, a lot of us were not ready for the pandemic. It hadn't occurred in a very, very long time. And it hurt a lot of businesses. But what we need to do is make sure that we learn from it and we implement things that are going to help us in the future. So those are two major things concepts that we want to make sure that we think about. So the first thing I want to do is kind of go through a risk review. Hopefully you all have had a chance to kind of think about these different hazards that may impact you. And what we're going to do, I've got a little poll that Stephanie is going to put up there that show the hazards, and it'll allow you, there we go, to select up to 3 hazards here. So just select any 3 there and hit submit, and select the 3 that you think are most concerning for your business. you'll see you've got, it's actually two sections because we had so many hazards. So go ahead and select 3 of those, and then go ahead and select submit, and we'll see how they turn out. Again, just pick your top 3. Hopefully you've had a chance to, between our previous workshop and this workshop, to think about your hazards and at least sort of rank them. And I know some of you have thought maybe it's mostly cyber if you're a home-based business, or you know, it really depends on what your business, the nature of it.
Looks like we've got several folks who have answered already.
All right.
7. So we'll give everybody a few more seconds. You can see that 3 of you haven't answered. So come on, folks. Okay, so I will tell you, Bill, I don't think you can see the results, can you?
Okay, no, I can't.
Okay, so our biggest, most people have answered pandemic as their biggest threat. We have in second place winter storm and flood for a tie there at 43%. And then it's a good mix between drought, tornado, extreme heat, and then other folks have answered, just kind of spattered around in third place, hailstorm, urban fire, wildfire, and interestingly, no one has answered dam breach, which is something that we talk about a lot in Lynchburg. All right, I'm going to end this poll.
All right.
And
Great.
share the results.
All right. Yeah, and again, you know, that's not totally shocking here. We're in the middle of a pandemic, so I think that's really on a lot of people's minds. And you know, depending on where we are in the state, you know, if we're next to the river, or if our business has to do with agriculture, you know, maybe drought's an issue. So really, you know, looking at the nature of our business and then where we're located in the state, you know, will help us kind of figure out which hazards we should be concerned about. The next poll I have is looking at the potential losses. So this is just kind of, there we go. What kind of economic impact might you expect if you maybe looking at your top hazard? You know, what sort of economic impact might you expect from that hazard for the costs? And go ahead and click on one, and then click submit. I'll give you a few minutes to fill that out.
Okay, we have about a little more than 63% of you have voted. Let's keep going. Voting is very important. Do you guys need a voting is very important lecture this morning? We'll get it a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to share the results so everybody can see them. Pretty evenly
Wow.
spread.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I didn't think that would come up, but it's like we have businesses of all sizes represented today.
Yep, for sure.
All right. So I know some of you might have just kind of guessed at that. We did have that worksheet to help kind of walk you through. We're not just looking at kind of direct impacts to your business, but also those indirect as well. Business interruption impacts. Depending on the hazard, that may be most of your economic impact is not being able to run your business. So it's good to think about all of our impacts, and then also our social impacts as well. What will it do to the employees, or you personally, when you start to think about your hazard impacts. Okay, so basically in this workshop, we're going to build off of this. So we have kind of a general sense of the magnitude of the impact or the potential impact from those different hazards, and we're going to look at what we can do about it, basically. So the question, once we start looking at our risks for the different hazards, we basically have to make a decision about whether or not that risk is acceptable. So if it is, we just basically have to deal with it if it's kind of a minimal risk. But if it's not acceptable, we have to think about ways to either mitigate it or to transfer it, okay, using insurance. So we'll have to think about whether that risk is acceptable, and then what can we actually do about it. So for our different types of mitigation, this is kind of some major categories of our mitigation. And you'll see some things, property protection. It might include, working with your community on just actually moving the business someplace else. If you have these repetitive losses that are occurring just year and after year, it may be time just to figure out where a better location would be for the business itself. And there are grants available to help you do this and pay for those costs of the relocation. There's also things like warning systems that can be implemented. Some businesses might have a basement where they store things. I know here, some of our restaurants, we've got some restaurants that have basements where they store extra, it could be kegs for food or that sort of thing. But you can actually install like little warning systems too that just warn you if there's like flooding on the ground. If there's water on your ground, where you've got your business food or some sort of inventory, that can be that warning system can basically help you then get stuff out so you don't have so much loss. There's also capacity, looking at plans, training, insurance. We'll talk about these different plans that are available to businesses, continuity of operations, mitigation, response. There's several different plans that you can look at. And then also employee training, exercising those plans to make sure that they are effective, updating them, and also making sure your insurance is correct. Not only do you have insurance, but does it actually cover what is at risk? And then there's also more things like structural projects where you might actually have to go in and get a contractor or maybe do it yourself to build things that either control the flooding so that you're not getting all the water into the business, or when the wind impacts your business, it doesn't do as much damage. So there are different things that we can do structurally as well to the business to help it withstand our hazards. And I'll talk about each of these things in more detail later on. There's also outreach and information. This is the employee training, websites, demonstration events, making sure that your employees kind of know what to do if something happens, integrating that into their employee training, at the very beginning, but then also making sure that they get trained periodically on updates. And then also looking at some natural system as well. So looking at maybe fire-resistant landscapes, slope stabilization, or maybe landslides. So there's all these kind of different categories, and some are more relevant to you all than others. Certainly building that capacity within your business, potentially taking on maybe a structural project if you have like a very specific hazard that may impact you. And then, of course, outreach and information, making sure people have the correct information, the most up-to-date information on kind of what to do. So I'm going to kind of go through each of these hazards individually and talk about some things that we might be able to do. In some cases, some of the costs that are associated with those things as well. So it looked like there were some folks who may be impacted by flood, and we had talked about dam failure too last time. So I don't know, the dam inundation area. Those are actually required by law to be created for high hazard dams. So if a dam fails and there is potential of loss of human life or a lot of economic impact, that dam owner, whether it's private or public, is required to actually create a dam inundation area. And the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, DCR, actually has and maintains all these, they're called emergency action plans. And in those emergency action plans, there are these inundation areas that you can kind of see. So not to get back into our hazard, but I think it is important if you do have a dam upstream, and we have, like Stephanie said, we have several here in Lynchburg. Even the city has high hazard dams that could impact the downtown area. And I know, places like Richmond has several outside the city as well. So it's important to take a look at those high hazard dams and make sure that you're not in those inundation areas. Now the mitigation might be similar to flooding, but you may actually be in the dam inundation area, but not in the 100-year FEMA floodplain. So if you are in that dam inundation area, you can still get flood insurance that'll cover you. Because remember, if the dam fails, your insurance policy may not cover you. So make sure you keep that in mind. So I try to talk up my dam failure, because a lot of people don't know they're at risk until they're flooded out. And we saw that here in Lynchburg, where businesses were having to clean up themselves, and they may not have been insured. So these are just some prices that this is actually from FEMA guidance, but elevating the property, like I mentioned earlier, you can actually just have the community buy out the property, and you can relocate to someplace that may be more safe, maybe safer. There are some ways to elevate the property as well. It can be kind of costly, and it depends on what the property looks like, the structure itself looks like, whether or not it can be elevated or not. If it's like a historic property, you're probably not going to be able to do that. And depending on what your foundation looks like and the shape of the building, that will drive these costs. We also have dry flood proofing. So this is kind of preventing the water from infiltrating the business itself. So we're basically keeping that water outside the business. And then we also have wet flood proofing, which basically we're saying that, yeah, we're going to allow the water in, but we're going to make sure it doesn't do a lot of damage when it's in here. So we'll talk about each of these things a little bit later. But there are different ways, and some aren't as costly as like elevating a structure. It's also doing some stormwater management. So your business may actually get flooded if you're in an urban area, or you're downstream from an urban area. It may actually get flooded from just the stormwater. It may not be in that FEMA 100-year floodplain, but it may just get flooded from the stormwater. And there are some ways that we can manage that stormwater better. And this can actually happen to historic buildings as well. So when the building was originally created 100 years ago, there wasn't a lot of development around it. And then as the development came in, they started experiencing stormwater issues. So again, you can actually also get flood insurance, like I mentioned, if you're outside the 100-year floodplain, and that might be something that you look into as well. The premium will be much cheaper than if you're in a floodplain. So this is an example of some dry flood proofing that businesses have used in the past. These are a couple of different techniques. You can see this one at the top here. They basically built this kind of looks like a wall around the structure itself. They've got a way to go in and out of the business, but it's got this big waterproof door here. But this is keeping all the water outside of that business and keeping the damages down. There's also ways to, if you look at your windows and look at your flood elevation here, you can basically update those windows. So again, you're sealing off your window, making it basically an impermeable surface so water doesn't get into it. Adding gaskets. And shields and that sort of thing to make sure that all that water is kept at bay. So there's a lot of different ways to dry flood proof. You can also look at things like building like a French drain outside, so the water is basically going into that French drain and going around the structure. So again, different ways to do dry flood proofing. It's usually a little bit more expensive than the wet flood proofing. Which is the next slide. So with wet flood proofing, like I said, you're allowing the flood water to enter the building, but you're basically limiting the damage that it can cause. So it might be moving essential things, equipment. It could be HVAC, could be a furnace, could be whatever you have in your basement, a water heater. It might be moving that up to the next floor so that if it does flood, the basement floods, you're not as impacted. It might be moving, if you've got equipment for your business, it might be actually moving the control panels and all the essential equipment up, elevating it outside above the floodplain. Excuse me. So again, this could be a cheaper way to do your flood proofing. You could add a sump pump to the basement as well to get the water out. So different ways. Putting actually tiled floors down as well. Moving electrical sockets, your electrical up, so it doesn't impact your business. So these are all examples of some wet flood proofing that you can look into. There's also a lot of stormwater management that's available now as well. There are things like water gardens or rain gardens here out in front of this building. You can see the water kind of goes in. You've got a lot of vegetation here that absorb that water. So that's an option. Doing planter boxes out front. So you've got like a nice planter box out in front of the business that looks nice and inviting, but also works to mitigate your stormwater because the water goes into this drain and kind of goes out. It's sort of like a French drain. They've got planter box on top of it. So you're protecting the business, but also making it look nice as well. There's also rainwater harvesting that can be done where you have, and in some cases, it can be a pretty large tank that's collecting the water that's running off instead of just these large structures that produce a lot of runoff. This is a way to collect that, and also is a mitigation measure for drought as well. So you've got water there all the time. You can use that water for landscaping, other things, firefighting even. So that water can be used, and it's not running off into the basements and into other properties. There are green roofs as well that help absorb some of the water instead of just having it run off directly. There's a lot of different stormwater management techniques that can be used. And they're, as you can see, they're kind of all sizes. You know, you can have a pretty simple one. You know, spend a couple $1,000s on something, but you'd also get a pretty massive tank as well that is more costly. So a lot of ways to integrate stormwater management. Like I said, there's French drain that you can look at. This is kind of a cross section of that, what that looks like. Sump pump, so getting the water out of your basement. And a lot of you have probably, you might have these in your home as well, if your home has flooding quite a bit. And as I mentioned, there's sensors too that you can install that will tell you when there's water in your structure, so that you can kind of implement your response plan then and try to get things out of the basement. And we'll talk about these different plans a little bit later today, but there are several different plans, and you can have a response plan basically for each hazard if you wanted to. So one for flooding, one for tornado, one for earthquake. So you can have all these different kind of plans that are focused on the hazards, and you can basically implement those. Okay, so that was a little bit about the flood and dam failure mitigation. Again, there's a lot of, those are kind of focused on the structural aspect of it. There are a lot of, I guess, the softer mitigation measures we'll talk about later today. But for this first part, I'm just going to talk mostly about some of the structural things that are available to us. So for wind mitigation, we've got, the key with wind mitigation is to make sure that your building envelope is secure. So we don't want any sort of breakage in our building. We don't want our windows to break, our doors to break, because then we get a lot of damage. We don't want to lose our roof. So we want to make sure everything is pretty tight. And so these different things are available to us to make sure that we keep that building envelope intact. So we have basically at the top middle here, we have these things called hurricane straps, which is our roof wall connection. So here's our roof here, here's our wall. And there are actually different types of hurricane straps that we can use. And you can go to Home Depot or Lowe's or one of those hardware stores, and you can actually see these. Now, there are bigger ones that you might see in like Florida or on the coast. We have kind of basic ones here in our region, but you can actually order these as well online. And these are pretty cost effective. They don't cost a lot of money, a couple bucks per each one. And then if you integrate those, you'll actually make a much stronger building structure. So if you are planning to, let's say, replace your roof or something like that, that might be something to look into. But a lot of times here, you'll see that builders just kind of toenail these things together, and they don't use these straps because it is a little bit cheaper to do it just with toenailing it. So if you are working with a builder, make sure that you say, hey, spend that extra money up front. It will make a big difference if you ever experience tornado or hurricane winds. We also have shuttering as well. So you'll see this more on the coastline. A lot of the shutters in my area are more cosmetic. They don't actually function, but we want to make sure that they are hurricane rated shutters that get used. Because those will protect our windows, basically. So if we lose our window during a wind event, basically the forces acting on our roof, they just skyrocket. They close to double. And so what basically happens in a lot of hurricanes or tornadoes is you lose your windows, and then immediately afterwards you lose your roof as well. So if we have shutters, we can kind of keep those, keep that window intact. You can see a different type of shutter down here for a business, this roll shutter here. So there's a lot of different types of shutters, but you just want to make sure that they're hurricane rated. We also have this thing called secondary water resistance. So you'll see here on our roof, we've got kind of this tape here that prevents water from kind of seeping into our joints. So if we do start to lose our roofing, our tiles here, our shingles, whatever we have as our roofing, this will prevent the rain from pouring into our home or our business and doing damage to that business. Okay, and again, this isn't super costly to do. You know, if you have to replace your roof anyway, it might be something to look into. And then we have anchoring too. So if we're on a structure that might be manufactured housing or manufactured building, it's on cinder blocks or something like that, the foundation. This might be something to look at as a tie down for helping to support kind of high wind events, so we don't get a lot of damage from those. And so you can kind of see, here's our wind mitigation inspection overview. We talked about these different roof geometries last time, but our hip roof basically withstands our winds better than this non-hip roof, this gable roof here. So you'll see, if you go to southeast, like Florida, you'll see a lot more roofs like this. Of course, they also don't have to worry about snow loads as well. But anyway, the roofing also has to do with the damage. Another thing you can look at is actually when you put your roofing up, you'll see with roofs like this, you get a lot of damage on the ends during a hurricane. What you can do is you can actually have use a bigger nail or a screw especially on the ends of your roof, so that again, it's not a huge cost. You're maybe increasing your nail size or using a screw instead of a nail, but that can also be pretty beneficial for preventing wind damage. For tornado, we also have safe rooms, and this this is something that you can kind of build for in your structure. There's actually kits for it as well. I saw Home Depot has one for about $6,000, and you can bring this in. You can install it in your business as a safe room. A lot of people use their basements, but a lot of buildings don't have basements. So if that's something of concern, you see a lot of these more in the Midwest where you have more tornado activity. And there are a few things that you need to consider, but you can see that they do withstand a tornado. Here's one that actually withstood a tornado. And even though the structure around it is broken down, but this is a good way to kind of think about the safety of the people in the building. Tornado is one of those things where you may not have time to evacuate to get home or to get to another building that has a basement. So this is a mitigation for that. We also have wildfire mitigation as well. So in this case, we have looking at both the structure itself, but then also the site around the structure. So looking at the site around the structure, making sure you have your trees trimmed 10 feet from the chimney. If you have a chimney, this is basically, they create these different zones. So depending on how far away from the business it is, so 30 feet is for this first zone, and then the second zone goes a bit further to 70 feet. And just making sure that you want to space your vegetation so that it doesn't catch and spread. So if there is one that ignites, it doesn't spread to the others. Looking at also removing tree limbs that are 10 feet from the ground. So if there's fire going along the ground. You don't want it to then move up your trees and catch the trees on fire and then spread that way. So there's different things you could do within your site. There are different fire-wise communities around the state, and they promote these practices. So you may want to look to see if your business is around or in a fire-wise community to see. They may have some additional information for you on ways to mitigate this for your business. I think there was a few folks who said that wildfire might be an issue, especially if you're in sort of that wildland urban interface where you've got a lot of structures in a wildland environment. That might be something that you should look into. And then also there's some things that you could, for your structure itself, instead of making everything a wood structure with a bunch of wood chips for landscaping, you can start, or wood shingles even, all these things are potential fuels for that wildfire. And we might want to think about basically, as you're upgrading your structure, looking at maybe rock instead of wood mulch. Little things like that might make a difference down the road. There's also a few things you could do for landslide mitigation. This is pretty site specific, but if you are, I'm here in Lynchburg and there's a lot of hills here, and so looking at your site property, what's around it, to see if you're at risk. There are a few things that you could do, and it can start with just planting vegetation. Vegetation can be used for slope stabilization, and you can work with your community. Your community might have ways to plant trees and other vegetation in the right-of-ways or in areas around your property to help with this slope stabilization. There's also more engineered slope stabilization as well. It's more costly when you start looking at actually putting in rock bolts and shotcrete and stuff like this. Retaining walls, those can be more expensive, but that may be something that you have to do, or it could be a combination of those as well. Maybe it's a retaining wall below and some vegetation plantings above to help out as well. You could do terracing too, which is right here. So that might be something that you can do as well. So again, this is a pretty site-specific mitigation measure. Depending on where your business sits in relationship to all these hills and that sort of thing. I'm going to talk a little bit about earthquake mitigation. We do have some seismic zones in Virginia. We have the Central Virginia Seismic Zone. There's one in the Southwest Virginia as well. If you were around during the Mineral Virginia earthquake, you probably felt, and we actually had one we felt not too long ago this year that was in North Carolina that we felt. And there's a couple of things. We're not going to get like probably the major earthquakes that you see the West Coast or Midwest or South Carolina, but we do get some shaking, and there are some basic things that you could do to help prevent any sort of damage from that little shaking that we get. Some is making sure that you've got all your bookshelves anchored. Hopefully you're doing that anyway, so you don't have someone pull a bookshelf on top of them. But anchoring, we want to make sure when these bookshelves start moving that the bookshelf itself doesn't fall, but then also the stuff that's in the shelf, we want to make sure that doesn't come out either, especially if it's glass, if it's food products. You can get some basic, this is pretty cost-effective mitigation here, just to keep these things from falling out of the shelf. And even like a lot of you may have seen the wire cages, just installing it upside down provides a little bit of a lip here, so that if you do get any sort of shaking, it doesn't fall and destroy your product. And I'll tell you, a lot of the damage that I've seen from small earthquakes are actually, it's due to flooding, And what happens is a lot of businesses have these coming out of the ceiling, right? These are for your fire mitigation. So in case you have fire in your business, these things turn on and they release water, and then they put out the fire. But what happens in an earthquake is these get moved around and they get sheared off here from the ceiling, and then all the water comes out and floods your business. So you have a minor earthquake that causes a major flood because your older fire extinguisher here has sheared off. And they make these, this is an example of a flexible one here in this picture. You can get flexible ones that, a little bit more expensive, but might be worth it. You might have heard when we had that earthquake back in Mineral, Virginia, this happened to some businesses in Maryland, which is pretty far away, but they had these things shear off, and it caused a lot of damage. So that, these are some basic things. I'm not saying that we're really at risk to earthquakes, but we do get shaking every now and then. And it's, just good to have, spend just kind of a little bit of money on just some basic mitigation, or doing things a little bit differently for stuff you've already bought. Things to consider. With drought mitigation as well, this can be a tough one. With drought, it's one of these hazards that's kind of slow moving, and it takes a while to kind of get to. So it's not a quick response tornado or earthquake, but it can be difficult to mitigate for it. I mentioned water catchment earlier. There are some pretty massive water catchments around the country. You can see here this huge tank here on the left side, and then it's some in the basement here as well that they've collected water that can be used for different purposes, but also implementing some water conservation practices. You don't have to do that all the time, but if you get used to doing this water conservation practices, then when you actually get into a drought, you're better off because you kind of know what to expect. If you are doing crops and that sort of thing, looking at some drought-resistant crops, it might be the same type of crop, but maybe it does better with less water. Looking at potential irrigation using drip so your water requirements aren't as high. So a few things here that might be interesting. With drought-resistant crops, that may be something you practice. You do a little. Have a little bit of your field with these drought-resistant crops just to see how well they grow and see if there's anything special you have to do to them, before you get into that drought, because your planting season might be done when you get into the drought, and then you're kind of stuck with the crops you have planted. So maybe something to look at kind of before you get to a point where your crops are dying, and then of course potential for insurance there as well. Make sure you're properly insured. And we also have a couple other, those are sort of the natural hazards. I think I touched on most of them that we talked about. Then we also have a couple of hazards like pandemic and cyber that I was going to talk about as well. Pandemic, this is one that we're all basically facing right now, and it's one that really a lot of businesses did not prepare for. Actually, a lot of communities did not prepare for it. If you look at the mitigation plans around the country, there are very few that actually call out pandemic. Very few that were written more than a year or two ago. They call out pandemic and really have real tangible stuff in it. A lot of times they'll call out pandemic and then there'll be like a page or two on kind of what a pandemic is, but there's not a lot of action. So what we want to do is I think moving forward is to start looking at the policies in place, making sure we implement policies for employees that are more flexible, non-punitive, making sure that, flexible work sites, work hours, and a lot of this, I'm just kind of, this is stuff that you're dealing with, have had to deal with for months now. But it's taking kind of what's worked for you and it's getting it into a plan, so that if anything like this occurs in the future, you'll know, and maybe this is a plan that you keep around, and maybe 10 years from now, when you're still in business and something like this happens again, you'll be like, oh, here's our plan. We know kind of what works and what doesn't work, and we've documented it. And we've actually gone through it with new employees who may not have experienced it, so they kind of know what to expect. But identifying again our critical business functions and the employees that do those functions within that plan, looking at our business continuity, what is required for our business to keep on going. Upgrading our periodic cleaning, that might be something that we have to implement. If we're bringing folks into our business on a regular basis, kind of minimizing that face-to-face contact. I think a lot of us have seen kind of this as we try to go to businesses around the community. They'll have like that shield, or the employees will hopefully have their masks on. They may have the mask requirements posted outside. Some businesses are good at kind of enforcing stuff. Some are not as good. And then also, developing guidelines for, once an employee does become sick, what do you do? And I think that might be something that some of you haven't thought about yet because you haven't had an employee become sick. But that's something you should think about now before it occurs, so you know that, okay, an employee becomes sick. these are the steps we're going to take to make sure that my other employees don't get sick, and we're all kind of maintain our healthy environment. So developing those guidelines are very important as well. So anyway, so some ideas for pandemic. Again, it's very business specific for pandemic. Sometimes you're working with customers face to face. Other times you're able to actually work from home and be flexible, which is great. But identifying this stuff and making sure that we document kind of what's working and what's not working, and looking around at other guidance and other making sure that we're going to the correct kind of government sites to get guidance on that. And we also have, I'm going to talk about cyber, and then we'll take a little break here. But cyber is another one. We've got some resources as well in the sheet. We've got that one pager that has some additional cyber resources. But just keeping the software updated and upgraded, having that multi-factor authentication built into your system, and we see this a lot now with online banking, or even some of the businesses online where we're buying stuff and providing credit card information. They're texting us codes, or they're sending that through an email, or whatever it happens to be. Creating a system recovery plan that is specific to cyber attack, or just data getting corrupted. Making sure that we've got some way to recover our data. And then also, important with these plans is also exercising it as well. Making sure employees can implement it is important. Remove unwanted, unneeded, unexpected hardware and software from the network. A lot of that stuff out of date might be susceptible to attack. And then also making sure that you've got different levels of privileges for your employees. Based on what they should be working on, and kind of limiting your risk exposure. Segregating your critical networks and services as well is a big one. And then, of course, maintaining your backup at multiple locations. So if you do have a disaster in one location, it might be more than just a cyber attack. Maybe it's a natural hazard. but making sure that things are backed up at multiple physical locations so that you can access that information later on. Okay, so just one other thing for other mitigation. A big thing is generators. Generators can help us with a lot of different hazards. It could be, we could have like an extreme heat day where they cut power, or they have rolling blackouts. You could have power line go down from wind or from tornado, or your substation maybe got flooded. But there's all sorts of ways that you can lose power, okay, because we're all on the grid, or most of us are, and generators are a good way to kind of overcome that. And they can be pretty cost beneficial, looking at the cost of those versus the potential of business loss due to not having power. Air conditioning as well. In Virginia, we are kind of experiencing more extreme heat more often now. So having air conditioning, a way to cool down the business for your employees and your customers, is a way, and actually that draws people in to the business as well if it is air conditioned. I talk with a lot of people in the community, and I ask them, those folks who don't have air conditioning, I ask them what they do. Do they go to the government cooling center? They always tell me no. They actually just go to a business that's air conditioned, because at least then they can go around and look at things and buy things. So I think that could be a way to kind of promote, get more folks in as well. Having redundant power, as well, potentially looking at solar, so you don't have to rely on the grid. Water catchment we talked about for droughts as well as for firefighting, and then redundant heat source. There are cases where you have extreme cold, and if you lose your heat, it might be difficult to do business. But if you have that redundant heat source, you could maintain. And then also, like I say, doing the plans and drills are a big deal. A lot of us we practice, our fire drills where we kind of walk out of the office and we go outside and we wait around until someone tells us to go back in. For larger businesses, for smaller businesses, we could do these drills as well, and we could do them for different hazards as well. So we might have a tornado drill, or we might have like a small earthquake drill. A lot of people in this area don't really know what to do for an earthquake. They just kind of stand up and walk around instead of getting down, and it can be dangerous if the ground's shaking. So you can have these different drills for different hazards, and you can integrate that into your employee training, and they don't have to be. They could be surprise drills. They could be planned drills. But those are pretty beneficial as well. Okay, so what we're going to do is just take a little break now. We're halfway through, so we'll take about 10 minutes, 15 minutes less. Okay, so we'll just do 10 minutes. So we'll start back up in 10 minutes.
Hi everyone, this is Jennifer. We're ready to start again. Bill's computer is back online, so we have switched back. Stephanie is going to let him into the room in just a second, and he is going to show up under his own name with the presentation from there. So give us just a second. We'll get started as soon as we get that set up.
All right. Are you muted? Okay, let's go ahead and get started again. So we talked about some mitigation options that are available, based on the hazard that may impact you. A lot of them were more, I guess, physical, structural based mitigation, although we did talk a little bit about planning as well. And I mentioned that there are several different plans that you can look at, depending on what your needs are. But this slide basically goes through a couple of those plans that you may want to consider if you haven't developed them already, or if you have developed them, maybe consider an appendix or something like that to go into maybe a little bit more detail with certain hazards. So, the first one here is a hazard mitigation plan. This is basically looking at the stuff that we're doing over the 2 workshops. So looking at our risks for the business, looking at the business resources, identifying some mitigation actions, and then thinking about how to implement those actions and maintain them. So that's basically our hazard mitigation plan. It could be for a business, it can be pretty, it can be as detailed as you have the resources for, basically. It could be something pretty simple where you're just kind of going through the risk assessment and identifying your risks, and then looking at your mitigation, just kind of bulleting out maybe some mitigation actions for those different risks, and then thinking about, we haven't talked about this yet, but thinking about how to implement those mitigation strategies as well. More people might have a contingency plan. So this would be, if a disaster does occur, what will our business do? What's the plan if something does happen, and what are we going to follow to make sure that everything is maintained? So this one you may have thought about more, or maybe you already have a contingency plan in place. You may want to consider maybe focusing on a couple of different hazards. You can actually do maybe an appendix at the back to just focus on, this is what happens if, whatever natural hazard occurs, a flood or tornado or pandemic. This is what we're going to implement to make sure that our business continues. And similar to the continuity of operations planning too, so, what can we do to make sure that things are running with minimal interruption. So more businesses might be, focus on these 2 things for right now. But again, you need to think about this stuff before the event occurs. In the middle of an event, it's going to be very difficult to sit down and really think about your plan because you're trying to respond to everything. There's also a crisis communication plan. So this might be, during the events, what are some of the internal, external communication protocols that we have in place that we can use. So again, you want to think about this stuff ahead of time. You now know kind of what hazards may impact you, and you can start to put together some, communication ahead of time, so that you're not sitting there trying to figure out a way to make things sound good and make sure everything is proofread. If you have this kind of library of communication that you've already established, you're going to be more effective during the actual events. There's also a recovery plan as well. So if an event does occur, what are we going to need to do to kind of get back into running our business? This can be something like, well, we know, if a tornado occurs near here, or we have a wind event, we're going to have to do some debris management. Okay, so we should think about, well, maybe I should look at a contractor ahead of time who can come in and remove the debris pretty quickly. If you think about these things ahead of time, instead of trying to scramble around afterwards, because you're going to have a lot going on, to try to get back up and running. A lot of paperwork just for making sure that you get funding and that sort of thing, any loans or relief funding. That's going to take a lot of your time. So you don't want to have to try to figure out what the plan is to recover. So if you can think about, the more you can think about ahead of time and have in place before the event occurs, the better off you're going to be. And like I said, a lot of businesses I've seen, kind of add appendices at the end. So maybe they have like a standard plan for either continuity of operations, COOP, or recovery, and then they kind of build on it over time. So maybe they only focus on one or two hazards initially, kind of their top 3 hazards that we've kind of looked at already. Maybe they focus on those on year 1, but year 2 they focus on 1 or 2 additional hazards. So over time you'll have a pretty robust plan for all these different hazards, kind of using this approach. Okay, so plans extremely important. Something you can do internally. Something you might ask a consultant or an expert to help you out on, or just to review. But something that you should be doing ahead of time. So again, the mitigation plan, you need to consider all the hazards you're exposed to and kind of quantify those impacts for the highest risks. We'll talk about why we're going to quantify a little bit later, but you'll see a lot of the funding opportunities available to us are only available to us if we've gone through that process of quantifying our economic impacts. Determine which risks are too great, and then evaluate your mitigation options. So I kind of went through some slides on a couple of those, but what you can do initially is kind of list them all. Here's my big list of mitigation options. And then you look at your risk and you say, okay, this is how much is at risk here. And then you can start to kind of weed out which ones are not really either relevant or just too expensive or just not going to work. And so you can get down to maybe just a kind of a handful of mitigation. And it does help to have kind of multiple actions, multiple strategies for your mitigation. You shouldn't rely totally on one thing, because if that thing does fail, then you're stuck with the damage again. So if you have multiple ways to reduce that damage, you're going to have a more effective mitigation. And then just identifying those ways to implement the mitigation. So we'll talk about some of that a little bit later on, but there are some grants available. There's other funding available that we'll look at for businesses. And sometimes it's just a matter of you're planning to upgrade one thing in the business already, so why not do just kind of this additional to make you more resilient. So maintaining and evaluating the plan, making sure it's updated periodically as well. So once you have this plan in place and maybe you got your appendices in place, you really do need to think about updating it periodically. As your business grows, you're going to have more assets, you're going to have more risks out there. So you'll need to make sure that you update this plan to account for that change in your business. It should be done annually, maybe even semi-annually. Think about setting up 2 times a year, or you look at it and make sure it's still relevant, and if it needs to be updated, do it at that time. So that, and then also making sure that people know about the plan. Make sure if it's going to impact your employees, maybe they have some ideas of their own. Maybe they can help you out with some of it. But making sure that the plan is available for folks to look at. And like I said, like, big thing is exercising the plans. I see a lot of times people will write the plan, they'll spend a lot of time writing the plan, and then they'll kind of forget about it. Even if they do an annual update, they don't. It's really different to actually go through the process physically. And that's why we do things like drills. We do exercises. There are different types of exercises. There are things called like tabletop exercises, where you get a group of people together and you kind of go through your plan and test it with people there at the table, and you say, okay, this is occurring. What are you all going to do? You can bring in kind of an outside facilitator and kind of go through a specific hazard or two, and then you can get some recommendations, see what went well, what didn't go well, and then you can kind of implement that into your plan as an update. So again, you got to exercise the plans to make sure that they work correctly and people know what's going on. Like I said earlier, a lot of people are familiar with the fire drills. That is exercise. They have a plan to get people out of the office, and they are exercising that plan by doing these fire drills. So there are other things that you can do as well. Other drills. Fire is pretty prevalent, and a lot of people will drill it, but there's other things too. Tornadoes in some parts. You may want to, again, that's a hazard that occurs pretty quickly, so you may have to do something. But there's other things you can drill as well. If you have upset employee coming in, or if you have, like I said, just a minor earthquake, what the employees know what to do. So anyway, a lot of different types of drills that you can practice, and there's a lot of guidance you can develop as well, or really just take the guidance that other people have developed. So there's an example here on the right that shows you. This is for a school, but it could be adapted to a business. What to do for different emergencies. With kids in a school, it's a vulnerable population. We want to make sure that they know what to do, but employees can be vulnerable as well. So we want to make sure that that people know what to do in the case of emergency. What happens if we lose power? What are we doing there? Do we have a place where we're going to meet as an emergency shelter? Or if there is a disaster, maybe there's things that they should do, like not come into work, or whatever. They need to make sure that they know what to do in the case of a disaster as well, and making sure you integrate this into your employee training. Right up front, bringing this in to make sure they know. And I think it's also nice for the employee to kind of know that you're looking out for them, and you've thought about these different things that could impact them. I think as an employee, I would feel much better if I knew my employer was kind of all over these things. And making sure you have kits as well. We do have certain requirements where we have some first aid kits that are available, but you can kind of go above and beyond. There's kind of the minimal requirement, but then there's also kind of making sure that your kit is pretty robust, and it's also focused on the hazards that may impact you in that business. So making sure that those are potentially upgraded as well. Okay, so I talked about a lot of the mitigation plans that are available for us. So I'm going to do maybe the next 15 minutes, 10 minutes, is talk about, one big thing is how much should I spend, right? We looked at all these different mitigation options. We know kind of what's at risk, but do I really know how much I can spend to make it cost effective? We're not spending $1 million for earthquake mitigation, in Virginia. That just would not be, cost effective. So what we're going to do is look at how to think about how much we can spend, and looking at the costs of certain mitigation, and then also looking at benefit cost ratio. And some of you might have heard of like a cost benefit, and that's just kind of reversing the cost divided by the benefit. But for this, we're going to talk about the benefit cost ratio. So it's going to be our total benefits divided by our total costs. And we want that number to be as big as possible. And we're going to look at these, quantifying our benefits and our costs, because there are grant opportunities available to businesses where we have to actually go through this process and figure out if something is cost effective. And if it is, we can actually apply for a grant. It is, of course, competitive, so we want to make sure our benefit cost ratio is as high as we can make it, to make sure that we are competitive with other businesses around the country. Okay, so this gets to our worksheets again. So in the previous workshop, we talked about quantifying our risk. And for worksheet number 3, we actually identified the total loss, which is down there at the bottom for our business. So we looked at kind of all the structural losses and all the business interruption losses. And this gave us kind of a sense for the magnitude of our risk for a particular hazard. So in this example here, we looked at flood, and we got through our process here where we looked at potential impact to a flood. We were in the floodplain. And we looked at, the FEMA 100-year map, and we saw that we were going to be inundated. So we estimated our losses to be about $155,000 for a 100-year event. So to annualize that, we basically, because it's a 100-year event, we just divide by 100. If there's a 50-year event, we divide by 50. So you'll see here our annualized event here is about, we're probably going to lose about $1,500 a year for flooding. So that is the number that we're going to use when we start to look at our mitigation. Okay, so for calculating our benefits for mitigation, the first thing we're going to do is look at our losses avoided. So if we've estimated kind of our losses, our total losses to our business due to this hazard. So the next thing to look at is, okay, if I implement this mitigation measure, how much of that loss is going to be removed? It may not all be removed, it may only be half removed or, partial removed. But in some cases, we may remove the entire amount. So, if we have a mitigation measure in place that where we aren't going to have business interruption and we're going to have damage to our property, then we're not going to have any losses. So our losses avoided would basically be that entire amount. Okay, so that is when we talk about the benefits of mitigation, what we're talking about is our losses avoided due to that mitigation. Okay, so there is a little bit of math. I know, some folks don't like to do math, but there is a little bit of math, and I try to make it easier by putting it into a spreadsheet, so the spreadsheet does the math for you. But there's this thing called a present value coefficient, and what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at our present value of our project. Okay, so our project is going to have a certain lifespan, and depending on what that project is, if it's something like a piece of equipment we're buying, it might have like a 5 to 30-year lifespan. If it's like a structural project we're implementing, maybe it has a 50-year lifespan. Something more major like acquisition, relocation, usually they put in about 100 years as sort of the maximum lifespan. And these values are pretty typical when we're applying for FEMA grants. So you won't see a lifespan greater than 100 years. So that'll kind of be your max there for something that's permanent. And we have this thing called a discount rate, okay, which OMB sets for the federal grant process, and it's set to 7%. So in the U.S., 7% is what we use. You'll see in developing country, it's different, and they've even talked about doing a different percentage for climate adaptation projects, but that hasn't really been moved forward in this country yet. But basically, we have this discount rate set at 7%, and we have to figure out the lifespan of our mitigation. So using those two bits of information, we have this equation here at the bottom where we calculate our PVC, our present value coefficient. It's based on that, on the discount rate and then the lifespan of the project. Okay, and then if we go to our first worksheet here, you'll see that I've got worksheet 1, worksheet 2, and worksheet 3. And basically worksheet 1, I'm just taking the output from that last risk assessment worksheet and I'm plugging it in here. So I've got my total loss and my annualized loss here. So that is from that example I was working through the last time. So in this example, I'm just going to do one one hazard instead of multiple hazards. But these all work if you wanted to work through all of them. And then in worksheet number 2, you can kind of start to see I've started to work through my mitigation. So I've got a flood issue for my business. I'm going to do wet flood proofing, which is not as costly. So I typed in wet flood proofing there. And then I plugged in the lifespan and I plugged in my loss reduction. So hopefully it's going to be 100% loss reduction. And what this is going to do is it's going to calculate my total benefits for me. So let me go back to my spreadsheet or my PowerPoint. Okay, so my total benefits, I'm going to take that number I calculated, okay, my PVC, and I'm going to multiply it by my annualized losses avoided. Okay, and so that is going to give me my total losses. So for PVC, for the example I plugged in there, wet flood proofing, I have a 7%, so 0.07. Okay, that's my discount rate. And then I have my lifespan of 20 years, which I plugged in here, negative 20 here. My PVC is 10.59. So I take 10.59 and I multiply it by my annualized losses avoided here. So that gives me a total benefit of $16,457. Okay, so that will start to give me an idea of sort of how much I can start to spend on mitigation. Or this is the total benefit of that mitigation that I've provided in this example. Okay, so the example here, I'm going to start to see the benefit of about $16,500 or so dollars. Okay, so that is what is calculated here in my worksheet number 2. Okay, my next step is to look at my total costs. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some subfloor drainage. It costs about $3 per square foot. And I've got a 4,000 square foot structure. So it's going to cost about $12,000 to implement this mitigation. Now the maintenance costs, I'm going to say it's about $100 per year. Now you may not have any maintenance costs, which is fine. But if you do, you have to basically use that PVC value again in order to get to your total costs. Okay, so we're going to add these things together. This is our initial costs and then our maintenance costs. So we need to add those together to get to our total costs. Okay, so our 12,000 and then our 1,059. This would be $100 a year over the 20 years. Okay, with my PVC. So I get $1,059. So my total cost will be $13,059. So my benefit cost ratio is going to be my total benefits, which I misspelled, total benefits divided by my total cost. So 16,000 over 13,000. So I get 1.26. So because this value is greater than 1, it is cost effective. Now, if you're using this to apply for a grant, a FEMA federal grant, you'll want this number to be as high as possible because like I said, it was, it is competitive. There's basically they give out like $500 million for the entire country, so you've got to be pretty competitive for the grant application. But this is basically the process that you take in order to show that it's cost effective. So I go back to my spreadsheet here. I've just done the one example here. If I go to worksheet number 3, you'll see here I've got my cost benefit ratio. Benefit cost ratio is 1.26. Here are my total costs. Here's my maintenance costs that I put in, and here's my initial costs. So this is basically the process that we go through in order to apply. Start looking at applying for a federal grant. So let me go back to my PowerPoint here. So like I said, greater than 1, you're cost effective. If you have a bunch of costs and very little benefit, it's not going to be a very effective mitigation measure. So you might want to look at something else. Okay, so I've gone through these worksheets. I'm not going to go through them again, but just to kind of show you how you work through that. So the big thing is, how do I pay for this mitigation? I've shown it's cost effective for me to do this. There are some grant opportunities available to businesses. There is this toolkit as well that was developed by NOAA. If you click on this and go to their site, they'll show you all these different funding opportunities for the different agencies. I just went ahead and clicked on it here. So you'll see at the top here, you've got the FEMA grants that I was talking about earlier are here. Those are actually out now. They are requesting grant applications. You'll see those are due by the end of January from the state. I'll talk about that here in just a minute. You've got these other funded funds as well that are available, depending on what your type of business. Any sort of, if you have an ag business, they have USDA grants as well. So there are different. Some are more for communities, cities, and states, but there are some opportunities for businesses as well. Okay, so what can FEMA assist with? So here's a couple of examples: property acquisition, demolition and relocation, elevation, dry flood proofing and historical and non-residential structures. So if you do have a historical building that's at risk for something, they can help you with dry flood proofing, flood risk reduction projects, as well as emergency generators for all hazards. Okay, so there's grant funding available to businesses. FEMA has different grants. There's kind of these pre-disaster, which is on the left here, and then post-disaster. So right now we're looking at pre-disaster grants. There are some that are flood only, and there are some that are multi-hazard. So these are kind of our pre-disaster grants, and these are actually out right now. They just got sent out in September from FEMA. And then you got post-disaster as well. So if you have been impacted by a disaster, there are grant programs available for you as well. There are also loans that are available for different like SBA that are available as well after the disaster. So we're talking mostly pre-disaster in this workshop. So these are available to you right now. And basically what happens is that each state is going to apply for money from FEMA. So as a small business, what you have to do is first talk to the folks that help write your mitigation plan for the planning district, to talk to your planning district commission, talk to your county or your city, and they will basically have to apply for you. So you'll have to tell them kind of your issues. And if you're kind of a step ahead of everyone else, if you've already looked at some of these worksheets, because I will tell you, FEMA will have you fill out a cost benefit or benefit cost worksheet that is very similar to this worksheet that I've given you. So if you already have some of that filled out, it's going to be much easier for you to plug it into their official worksheet and submit it. So if you're kind of ahead of the game and you know kind of your risks and the mitigation benefits, and you looked at mitigation costs, maybe you got some contractors to give you an idea of what the cost would be, you're going to be kind of ahead of the game. And when you go talk to your city, your county, your planning district commission, and you have all this information ready, it's much easier for them to then give it to the state for the application. The state itself has to apply by January, but the state will probably require something by November or so in order to make sure the paperwork's all completed. So those are kind of the grants that are available to businesses. Like I said, they could help you. The things like emergency generators are big for a lot of different hazards. And if someone's helping you pay for that, the federal grant will cover 3/4 of the costs, so 75% of the costs. And sometimes the state will actually help pay for either the rest of it or part of that rest of it, 25%. So it's good to talk to your locality and see what might be available for your business. We have that one pager that has some additional links to it. Ready.gov is a good one for businesses. They've got a lot of templates already created. So if you are thinking about doing a flood, looking at flood or hurricane, they've got a lot of toolkits already for businesses on how to get ready for these specific hazards. So you can go here, you can download those toolkits and see what has already been developed. Okay, so with that, kind of wanted to leave a few minutes for questions. I know we're trying to stop at 11. At this point, I'm going to let you all ask any questions that you might have. Okay, so feel free to use the chat box if you do have a question. And my contact information here is here as well. So if you want to email me a question later on, if you forgot something, feel free to do that.
So, Bill, one of the things we wanted to talk about specifically was that there's a lot of math here. There's a lot of more complicated things that we are offering a one-on-one session afterwards. So if you go through this process, fill out your spreadsheets, run your initial numbers, and if you're feeling like, oh, I'm not totally sure, and I would like to have Bill sit down and really review this with me and talk about, do my numbers look right? Am I prioritizing the right things? That is an option. So there is an additional fee associated with that. And we can arrange it to go through a Zoom so that we're still socially distanced and working around your schedule as well. So Stephanie, maybe you can chime in and tell us about, if people are interested in that, how would they go about doing that? Because we're gonna run that through the SBDC.
That's right. If you are interested in taking advantage of that, just contact me. You have all gotten repeated emails from me. My email address is skeener@lynchburgregion.org. I will pop it in the chat box as well. And if you are interested in doing that, just let us know. And we can have a conversation about those, what's associated with the fees. A question that I have for Bill is, I know that people all over the United States are applying for the grants, the mitigation grants. And it is competitive. How competitive? Like, is it a 1 in a million shot? Is it really, I'm a little bit, it makes me nervous to think about a very small business applying directly to the federal government for a grant. And so I just kind of like to manage expectations about what that process is like for a small business versus a very large business that has, a full complement of staff and accountants and experience doing this as part of this process.
Yep, that's a good question. And I should note that so as a business, small or large, you aren't applying directly to the federal government. So by bringing in your local city, county, and then also the state. So the state kind of submits this thing as like a whole packet of kind of applicants. But by going to the city first, you're telling them, these are the issues, and the city might say, you're right. We've noticed this when we did our mitigation plan, and it's not just your business; it's also everyone in your building or everyone on your block. So then it's not just your small business; it's like a dozen businesses that are going to get benefit from this grant application. So by doing that like kind of local coordination first, instead of just saying, I'm a small business, FEMA, can you give me some money, compared to, all these other businesses out there where, like you said, you don't have the resources to kind of compete with a large business. But by doing it locally, coordination first, then it can be more compelling to present to the state and then to the federal government as sort of a block grant of, it's not just going to help this one business, it's going to help these 12 businesses, and it's going to be very cost effective. And a lot of it does come down to that cost effective number. FEMA wants to make sure when they give you the grant money that you're going to, there's going to be a lot that they get out of it. When we showed that slide at the beginning where it's like $1 equals $6 in benefits, they want to increase that number by giving the best cost-effective grants. So I think just making sure your numbers are cost-effective and then doing that local organization first to make a more compelling case.
So that's just another great argument for knowing your neighbors and collaborating with them. I think we've all learned in COVID that we have those, we need to know who our neighbors are and how we can work with them.
Definitely.
The other thing that I would remind folks about as we're coming to the end of our time together is if you have any other questions, be sure and reach out to the Small Business Development Center, not just about risk mitigation, but, just any other small business related questions that you have. We will be putting the recording for this workshop up. I know that we had several people who, messaged today to say, is there going to be a recording? So you'll be able to review the recording. You should have all of those great spreadsheets. You guys, the spreadsheets are amazing. So don't miss those as you're thinking about this. You've got some great work to do for your business, and let the SBDC know after you've completed them. We'd like to know how things are going. Even if you don't feel like you need a one-on-one, just like to know you've done it and that it's been helpful. So any other questions? Bill, you've taught us all the things we need to know. It is a little overwhelming. I feel like in a week or so, we're going to have some people reach out and say, hey, I would like to have one of those one-on-ones. So reach out to me. Again, I will put the email address in chat and make sure you have it, but just email the email address that you have from the emails that you've received. It's skeener@lynchburgregion.org. If you tell me you have been negatively impacted by COVID, we can certainly talk about how we will handle those fees for you. So, okay. Look for a follow-up email from me. We will be posting the links to the videos and that. We'll be posting the links to the videos and the resources in the news section at sbdc.lynchburgregion.org. You can find more training there as well. We have a great series coming up on, or actually that we're in the middle of on Mondays about marketing and social media. You should certainly check that out. You can also find more training across the state at virginiasbdc.org, and COVID-19 resources are at that website as well. We will see you again soon, I'm sure, in another training. In the meantime, mitigate those risks by washing your hands and wearing your masks. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.